Hello, my name is Rob and I'm an alcoholic. Welcome back to the virtual sponsorship series. Today's video will be Chapter 1, Bill's Story. If you didn't get a chance to check out the previous video on the doctor's opinion, check that out now. War fever ran high in the New England town to which we new young officers from Plattsburgh were assigned, and we were flattered when the first citizens took us to their homes, making us feel heroic. Here was love, applause, war, moments sublime with intervals hilarious. I was part of life at last, and in the midst of the excitement I discovered liquor. I forgot the strong warnings and the prejudices of my people concerning drink. In time we sailed for over there. I was very lonely and again turned to alcohol. So Bill is talking about World War I here. He was drafted into the war and went to Europe where he did a tour. And it was here during the war that he first started his drinking career. We landed in England. I visited Winchester Cathedral. Much moved, I wandered outside. My attention was caught by a doggerel on an old tombstone. Here lies a Hampshire grenadier who caught his death drinking cold small beer. A good soldier is ne'er forgot, whether he dieth by musket or by pot. Ominous warning, which I failed to heed. So I want to make a mental note of this Winchester Cathedral, because much later on in the story, it's going to come up again. But when he was at Winchester Cathedral, he sees this tombstone of a soldier that drank himself to death. And it says it's an ominous warning which he failed to heed. So obviously in hindsight, he's looking back on this, realizing the irony of the situation. 22 and a veteran of foreign wars, I went home at last. I fancied myself a leader, for had not the men of my battery given me a special token of appreciation, my talent for leadership, I imagine, would place me at the head of vast enterprises which I would manage with the utmost assurance. I took a night law course and obtained employment as investigator for a surety company. The drive for success was on. I'd proved to the world I was important. My work took me about Wall Street, and little by little I became interested in the market. Many people lost money, but some became very rich. Why not I? I studied economics and business as well as law. Potential alcoholic that I was, I nearly failed my law course. At one of the finals I was too drunk to think or write. Though my drinking was not yet continuous, it disturbed my wife. We had long talks when I would still her forebodings by telling her that men of genius conceived their best projects when drunk, that the most majestic constructions of philosophical thought were so derived. So Bill definitely has quite a bit of an ego, and he dives into his work in Wall Street with expectations of becoming rich. And although he was in his early 20s and his drinking had not progressed to the point of being an extreme problem in his life yet, there was definitely some early signs there that he was a little bit abnormal in his drinking. Showing up at his finals drunk is definitely not the behavior of your average person. And I also like this part about how he tells his wife that men conceive their best projects when drunk. I can relate to that mind state of thinking that alcohol made me better in many ways, perform better, funnier, more likable, more sociable. By the time I had completed the course, I knew the law was not for me. The inviting maelstrom of Wall Street had me in its grip. Business and financial leaders were my heroes. Out of this alloy of drink and speculation, I commenced to forge the weapon that would one day turn its flight like a boomerang and all but cut me to ribbons. Living modestly, my wife and I saved the $1,000. It went into certain securities then cheap and rather unpopular. I rightly imagined that they would someday have a great rise. I failed to persuade my broker friends to send me out looking over factories and managements, but my wife and I decided to go anyway. I had developed a theory that most people lost money in stocks through ignorance of markets. I discovered many more reasons later on. So first and foremost, $1,000 was quite a bit of money back in the 1930s. If you were to take account for inflation, that would be worth over $16,000 today. So he was doing pretty well for himself. He was relatively successful. And he concocts this idea that in order to be even more successful, he could go out across country and go to these factories and other businesses that were about to be open for public trading and find out firsthand whether or not it would be a good investment. We gave up our positions and off we roared on a motorcycle, the sidecar stuffed with tent, blankets, a change of clothes, and 3 huge volumes of financial reference service. Our friends thought a lunacy commission should be appointed. Perhaps they were right. I had some success at speculation, so we had a little money, but we once worked on a farm for a month to avoid drawing on our small capital. That was the last honest manual labor on my part for many a day. We covered the whole eastern United States in a year. At the end of it, my reports to Wall Street procured me a position there and the use of a large expense account. The exercise of an option brought in more money, leaving us with a profit of several $1,000s for the year. So he goes out on his plan and goes and basically what he does is he shows up at these businesses, these factories, and he basically lies to them and figures out a way to get in and do a tour of the facility. Once he does this tour, he takes this info and he sends it back to Wall Street, and they make their investments based off of his intel. And there is a term for that today, and it's called inside trading. Matter of fact, Martha Stewart went to jail for doing the same thing, which back then was not illegal. For the next few years, fortune threw money and applause my way. I had arrived. My judgment and ideas were followed by many to the tune of paper millions. The great boom of the late 20s was seething and swelling. Drink was taking an important and exhilarating part in my life. There was loud talk in the jazz places uptown. Everyone spent in thousands and chattered in millions. Scoffers could scoff and be damned. I made a host of fair weather friends. So at this point, Bill is loving his life. He's making money hand over fist. He's able to drink. And they refer to this host of fair weather friends. That's a term given to people that are there for you when you're successful and everything is going well for you, and then the minute you start to run into some issues and need some help, they're nowhere to be found. My drinking assumed more serious proportions, continuing all day and almost every night. The remonstrances of my friend terminated in a row, and I became a lone wolf. There were many unhappy scenes in our sumptuous apartment. There had been no real infidelity, for loyalty to my wife, helped at times by extreme drunkenness, kept me out of those scrapes. So as his drinking career is already progressing so early on, he's starting to get some of his very first consequences of his drinking. A remonstrance is a forcefully reproachful protest. And so his friends had been kind of getting on his case about drinking. You know, he was always getting drunk, and they saw it as an issue, and they were nagging at him to stop, and he didn't listen and continued to do what he wanted to do. So eventually these people just stopped trying to nag him and kind of cut him out of their life. On top of that, in his home, he started to have a lot of fights with his wife. And that is kind of how it was for me in my alcoholism. The first thing that was affected and the first consequence of my drinking was that it affected my relationships with people negatively. In 1929, I contracted gall fever, We went at once to the country, my wife to applaud while I started out to overtake Walter Hagen. Liquor caught up with me much faster than I came up behind Walter. I began to be jittery in the morning. Golf permitted drinking every day and every night. It was fun to carom around the exclusive course which had inspired such awe in me as a lad. I acquired the impeccable coat of tan one sees upon the well-to-do. The local banker watched me whirl fat checks in and out of his till with amused skepticism. So Walter Hagen was a professional golfer from back in those times. So now that he is very well off, he joins the country club and he starts to golf, and his drinking is continuing to progress here as he's able to drink all day and all night. But it's still a good time for him. Abruptly in October 1929, hell broke loose on the New York Stock Exchange. After one of those days of inferno, I wobbled from the hotel bar to a brokerage office. It was 8 o'clock, 5 hours after the market closed. The ticker still clattered. I was staring at an inch of tape which bore the inscription XYZ -32. It had been 52 that morning. I was finished, and so were many friends. The papers reported men jumping to death from the towers of high finance. That disgusted me. I would not jump. I went back to the bar. My friends had dropped several million since 10 o'clock. So what? Tomorrow was another day. As I drank, the old fierce determination to win came back. So when the stock market crashed that he's referring to here, that is what led to the Great Depression of the 1930s. And he talks about these guys that are jumping out of the towers of high finance and committing suicide because they lost their fortune. If you look closely at the text, high finance is actually capitalized, and I was told that was done on purpose because it was their higher power, the realm of high finance, the worshipped money. But he's disgusted by the fact that these men are committing suicide. He thinks he's much better than that, and we'll see as the story goes on that he starts to change his tune when it comes to that. Next morning, I telephoned a friend in Montreal. He had plenty of money left and thought I had better go to Canada. By the following spring, we were living in our accustomed style. I felt like Napoleon returning from Elba. No St. Helena for me. But drinking caught up with me again, and my generous friend had to let me go. This time we stayed broke. We went to live with my wife's parents. I found a job, then lost it as a result of a brawl with a taxi driver. Mercifully, no one could guess that I was to have no real employment for 5 years, or hardly draw a sober breath. My wife began to work in a department store, coming home exhausted to find me drunk. I became an unwelcome hanger-on at brokerage places. So in this first paragraph, he refers to Napoleon returning from St. Elba. During the course of Napoleon Bonaparte's reign, he was defeated and exiled to an island. After being exiled there for a while, he escaped the island, snuck back into France, and was able to take back control of the military and thus retake control of the country. So he's talking about feeling like he was redeemed after this crash. He was able to go to Canada and resume his high lifestyle. But his drinking is getting real bad, and even though he's gotten some promising opportunities in spite of everything going on in the country, he just squanders them with his drinking. And now he's starting to get some more severe consequences. his not able to hold a job, so he's like slowly but surely losing his ability to be a functional member of society. And one line in particular that hits me really hard is, I became an unwelcome hanger-on at brokerage places. And that hits me hard because I fully identify with being an unwelcome hanger-on. I got myself quite a bad reputation in the thralls of my alcoholism and in my addiction, and nobody wanted me around. It was common knowledge that I was bad news, and I would show up places and nobody would make me feel welcome, and it was that crushing loneliness that I think really expedited my journey to rock bottom. It really helped me crack under the pressure of it all and seek help. Liquor ceased to be a luxury. It became a necessity. Bathtub gin, 2 bottles a day, and often 3 got to be routine. Sometimes a small deal would net a few $100s, and I would pay my bills at the bars and delicatessens. This went on endlessly, and I began to waken very early in the morning shaking violently. A tumbler full of gin followed by 6 bottles of beer would be required if I were to eat any breakfast. Nevertheless, I still thought I could control the situation, and there were periods of sobriety which renewed my wife's hope. So here he's referring to that line that is often talked about in AA, that line we cross where it's no longer just a habit, but it's a physical need. He's drinking multiple bottles of liquor a day, and this bathtub gin is some bootlegged liquor because this was during the time of Prohibition. And if he didn't drink, he would wake up shaking violently, which is far progressed from earlier when he talked about feeling jittery in the morning. That's like a little anxious and probably hungover, but now he's shaking violently. He needs to drink quite a bit of alcohol just to stop the shaking. Also, he had some periods of sobriety, so he wasn't 24/7 drinking per se just yet, but it was definitely enough for him to be exhibiting withdrawal symptoms. Gradually, things got worse. The house was taken over by the mortgage holder. My mother-in-law died. My wife and father-in-law became ill. Then I got a promising business opportunity. Stocks were at a low point of 1932, and I had somehow formed a group to buy. I was to share generously in the profits. Then I went on a prodigious bender, and that chance vanished. So as bad as that last paragraph was, with him waking up shaking violently, things are still progressing. And this is one of the things I love about this chapter. In Bill's story, it paints a beautiful picture of how alcoholism is a progressive illness, and it's always getting worse as time goes on. And once again, he gets tight at just the right time and goes on a bender and loses his chance to pull himself out of this hole that he has dug for himself. So many times I came so close to getting out of the wreckage that my life was, just to screw up the opportunities that had been given to me. I woke up. This had to be stopped. I saw I could not take so much as one drink. I was through forever. Before then I had written lots of sweet promises, but my wife happily observed that this time I meant business, and so I did. Shortly afterward I came home drunk. There had been no fight. Where had been my high resolve? I simply didn't know. It hadn't even come to mind. Someone had pushed a drink my way and I had taken it. Was I crazy? I began to wonder, for such an appalling lack of perspective seemed near being just that. So he's having like a moment of clarity here where he's like clearly seeing for probably the first time how much of a problem his drinking actually is. And so he's sort of got part of the picture here. He sees that he cannot take so much as one drink, right? He's starting to see the allergy that we talked about when we went through the doctor's opinion. So he's starting to understand a portion of what eventually became step one, but he still doesn't have the whole picture. So this is basically a firm resolution. So he really does mean business, but it is just a firm resolution because he didn't have the knowledge. He didn't have the ability to take action after making this firm resolution because ignorance, basically. It had not been laid out before him yet. Renewing my resolve, I tried again. Some time passed and confidence began to be replaced by cocksureness. I could laugh at the gin mills. Now I had what it takes. One day I walked into a cafe to telephone. In no time I was beating on the bar, asking myself how it had happened. As the whiskey rose to my head, I told myself I would manage better next time, but I might as well get good and drunk then, and I did. The remorse, horror, and hopelessness of the next morning are unforgettable. The courage to do battle was not there. My brain raced uncontrollably, and there was a terrible sense of impending calamity. I hardly dared cross the street lest I collapse and be run down by an early morning truck, for it was scarcely daylight. An all-night place supplied me with a dozen glasses of ale. My writhing nerves were stilled at last. A morning paper told me the market had gone to hell again. Well, so had I. The market would recover, but I wouldn't. That was a hard thought. Should I kill myself? No, not now. Then a mental fog settled down. Gin would fix that. So 2 bottles and oblivion. So now this story's really starting to get good. It's really starting to heat up. So he, on his second attempt, so his first attempt was short-lived. Almost immediately he got drunk, and that was him trying to stay sober just on his own willpower. So now he gives it a second try, figuring the first time was a fluke, and he does okay for a little bit, but then he gets cocky and ends up drunk real quick. In that last paragraph, the remorse, the horror, the hopelessness, I think that is a great description of what it feels like to be in the thralls of the phenomenon of craving. It's impossible to control, and he paints a good picture of that here. In my own experience, being in that mind state where you're desperately trying to stop, but after having succumbed to the desire maybe the night before and waking up the next morning panicking. I've dug through dumpsters because I had thrown my stash out the day before, swearing off the stuff forever, or rolled around in bed sick and just trying to make it through the day. And after what seemed like hours had gone by, I look at the clock and only 15 minutes had passed, and just like that, I'm out the door, on my way to the closest bar or the closest drug dealer. Another thing that I think should be noted is he's starting to have some suicidal ideation here, and it was like 2 paragraphs ago, more or less, that he was looking down on the men jumping from the high towers of finance. So he's slowly but surely being humbled by alcohol. The mind and body are marvelous mechanisms, for mine endured this agony 2 more years. Sometimes I stole from my wife's slender purse when the morning terror and madness were on me. Again I swayed dizzily before an open window or the medicine cabinet where there was poison, cursing myself for a weakling. There were flights from city to country and back, as my wife and I sought escape. Then came the night when the physical and mental torture was so hellish, I feared I would burst through the window, sash and all. Somehow I managed to drag my mattress to a lower floor, lest I suddenly leap. A doctor came with a heavy sedative. Next day found me drinking both gin and sedative. This combination soon landed me on the rocks. People feared for my sanity. So did I. I could eat little or nothing when drinking, and I was 40 pounds underweight. So, as bad as all of this has been up until now, he goes on for another 2 years like this. And now he's getting real close. He's flirting with the idea of suicide, and that's definitely where I was brought towards the end. You know, I had conceded to my innermost self that I would be better off dead. You know, I knew that there were people that did care about me, but I felt as if my existence was just bringing them pain, and perhaps the only good I had left to do was to just take myself out of the equation. And then he tries the geographical change as a cure. I've messed my life up in 3 different time zones trying to do that stuff, and wherever you go, there you are. And then another thing I feel that should be noted is this doctor comes with the heavy sedative, and then next thing you know, he's drinking gin and taking the sedative. Now, keep in mind that this is in the 1930s. I don't know what a heavy sedative is considered, you know, but their cough syrup had like morphine and cocaine and all sorts of drugs in it. So if that was just their cough syrup, God only knows what a heavy sedative was. So this guy's drinking and drugging over here. It also says that he was 40 pounds underweight. And so he's kind of approaching on like one of the consequences that come sometimes later down the line. His physical health is starting to fail him. Sometimes that comes quicker for some people, but usually it does take a while. And so his health is on the decline and he's not in good shape. My brother-in-law is a physician, and through his kindness and that of my mother, I was placed in a nationally known hospital for the mental and physical rehabilitation of alcoholics. Under the so-called belladonna treatment, my brain cleared. Hydrotherapy and mild exercise helped much. Best of all, I met a kind doctor who explained that though certainly selfish and foolish, I had been seriously ill, bodily and mentally. It relieved me somewhat to learn that in alcoholics, the will is amazingly weakened when it comes to combating liquor, though it often remains strong in other respects. My incredible behavior in the face of a desperate desire to stop was explained. Understanding myself now, I fared forth in high hope. For 3 or 4 months the goose hung high. I went to town regularly and even made a little money. Surely this was the answer, self-knowledge. So Bill gets into the hospital. He gets into what was then a treatment center, where he comes under the care of none other than Dr. Silkworth, the doctor who wrote the doctor's opinion. And he gets this extensive education on alcoholism. Basically, the information that we just went over in the last 2 videos when we went over the doctor's opinion. Bill was privy to that same information from Dr. Silkworth. And so he leaves the treatment center with his head held high, thinking now that he knows all about his mind and all about his alcoholism, there's no way he's going to drink again. But it was not. For the frightful day came when I drank once more. The curve of my declining moral and bodily health fell off like a ski jump. After a time I returned to the hospital. This was the finish, the curtain, it seemed to me. My weary and despairing wife was informed that it would all end with heart failure during delirium tremens, or I would develop a wet brain, perhaps within a year. She would soon have to give me over to the undertaker or the asylum. They did not need to tell me. I knew and almost welcomed the idea. It was a devastating blow to my pride. I, who had thought so well of myself and my abilities, of my capacity to surmount obstacles, was cornered at last. Now I was to plunge into the dark joining the endless procession of sots who had gone on before. I thought of my poor wife. There had been much happiness after all. What would I not give to make amends? But that was all over now. So, being so sure and so convinced that he was going to stay sober now that he had this self-knowledge, he gets out of this treatment center, and shortly after ends up drunk again. And it says his health fell off like a ski jump. He picked up right where he left off. And that's an important point there, because it doesn't matter how long we've been abstinent. When we pick back up, we rapidly progress to a state that was just as bad before we abstained, or perhaps even worse. And so at this point, everybody's writing him off. The doctors are giving up on him. His wife is in despair because she knows at this point that she's going to lose him. And he was all right with the idea. He had fully surrendered to his alcoholism. He was resigned to a slow death by alcohol, and he couldn't wait for it because the misery of his existence was just too much for him to bear. And then it goes on to talk about how his pride was hurt by this. You know, he thought so highly of himself, and there's a stark contrast here from the very beginning when he gets back from World War I as a veteran. He's got these dreams and these high hopes for himself, and he thinks that because of his leadership skills, he's gonna have the world in the palm of his hand. And now, all these years later, he's basically close to his deathbed and completely defeated. So it really did bring him through the ringer and humbled him. No words can tell of the loneliness and despair I found in that bitter morass of self-pity. Quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I had met my match. I had been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master. So here it is, right here. This is that step one moment. The first time when he realized he couldn't take so much as one drink, it was a firm resolution. He wasn't aware of how hopeless his situation was yet. He had finally realized it was a problem, but didn't realize the extent of which the problem was, because the only solution is abstinence, and little did he know that he has an inability to abstain. I always like to say we have a body that cannot process alcohol and a mind that cannot process reality without it. So, fully realizing his hopelessness after, even with all the self-knowledge that he had learned in rehab, he still can't stay sober. He's really hit his bottom. Trembling, I stepped from the hospital a broken man. Fear sobered me for a bit. Then came the insidious insanity of that first drink, and on Armistice Day 1934, I was off again. Everyone became resigned to the certainty that I would have to be shut up somewhere or would stumble along to a miserable end. How dark it is before the dawn. In reality, that was the beginning of my last debauch. I was soon to be catapulted into what I like to call the fourth dimension of existence. I was to know happiness, peace, and usefulness in a way of life that is incredibly more wonderful as time passes. So I think this is a good paragraph to stop on. It sets us up for the turn of events that's going to happen in the second half of this chapter when Ebby Thatcher comes and visits him. So we'll call it quits for now, and next time we will finish the chapter. Thanks for listening, and as always, if you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and feel free to comment. God bless. See you next time.